Hello, my loves. Welcome to Pain to Joy. My name is Danielle Phd, and I want to thank you from my whole heart for being here today. How are you doing? How is your heart feeling today? I invite you, if it feels good to you, to place your hand on your heart and take a deep belly breath in, low into the belly, and a long exhale. Shaking off all that no longer serves and perhaps never did. Yesterday morning, I woke up feeling panicked, trying to catch my breath, feeling some anxious feelings in my chest, from my belly up to my throat. And a few moments after that, I started to remember that there were a good few years where I woke up like that with a more intense feeling of panic and anxiety most days, and that went on for years. And so there was a gift in experiencing that yesterday morning, because I started to think about the first time I experienced a panic attack, when I finally got into mindfulness, and it felt like the right time to share with all of you. So if you're new here, or if you haven't heard other episodes, I was in a car accident in July of 2010. And as I mentioned, I did experience a panic attack, and it was in the fall of 2010. I was experiencing immense pain. My sternum had been broken in the accident, and it was quite painful. There were other injuries that I sustained that also were quite painful, and I tried to move forward with my life, and that pain, that physical pain, was quite intense. And so I do feel like by the time I got to Bali for my next door neighbor's, a friend of his was getting married, and it was so beautiful. The groom was from Australia, the bride from Japan. I met beautiful, wonderful people and made some incredible connections. And I think it was 2 nights before the wedding, there was this monsoon rain. And it was nighttime, and I was in my hotel room. And the bathroom window of my hotel room gave to a big space that was covered by glass. So imagine a big glass greenhouse, and I believe it was a market during the day, and it was built above a road. So it was sort of outside, inside, but the way that the rain was hitting the glass on the top of that greenhouse type space was very loud, and it just got louder and louder, and it's almost like it intensified to the point where all of a sudden I experienced my first panic attack. And at first I wasn't sure what to do. I do recall too, there were noises down the hall, different languages. It felt like it was echoing. It just was all so much. And I didn't know what was happening. I'd never experienced anything like this before. I eventually made my way out of the main building where I was staying to see my friends. They had more of a freestanding, almost like a pagoda room all to themselves with a nice terrace. And luckily, one of my friends was there, and we sat out on the terrace, and just being able to physically see the rain, and it wasn't as loud. Over time, I slowly calmed down. I had been like sweating, heart palpitations. It was very uncomfortable, and that's the first time that I ever experienced that. And I did experience it since. And what I've learned as well is that's not something that happens because in that moment the rain was intense. This panic attack occurred because for months and months and months, I was experiencing this incredible physical pain. And what I probably have mentioned in previous episodes is I also was experiencing emotional pain that I hadn't even begun to uncover, discover, heal. And that was an incredibly uncomfortable experience, as you can imagine. And I did experience other panic attacks in my life after that. And it's interesting because I looked back, I thought, well, when did my mindfulness journey begin? I had been going to counseling, therapy, etc., learning different tools to feel better, feel more calm, feel more peaceful. But it wasn't until June of 2013 when I sought out help from someone named Doug Maclean, and I found him online. He had a company called Practical Wellbeing in Calgary, and he practiced mindfulness based stress reduction programs. And I found a program. I started to feel just overwhelmed. It had been years and years and years of this pain, years of waking up with this panic, like just every single morning catching my breath. But I think I just started to think that that was normal. I think I must have correlated it to the pain that I was in, not recognizing and being aware of the emotional pain that I was in. And sure, I kept thinking that maybe this is normal. And then there was a point where I couldn't do it anymore. And I was overwhelmed and overwrought, and these anxious thoughts and feelings were taking over my life. And so thankfully, I just looked back because I don't delete emails, and I found the email that I had sent to Doug back in June of 2013. And I said, do you have any openings for your workshop this weekend? And he said, yes, call me between this time and this time. And so on a Saturday in June of 2013, I attended a workshop called Calm Your Anxious Mind with Mindfulness Workshop. And I learned 3 mindfulness practices, and I learned more about the nature of anxiety and how to handle challenging experiences. And that was the beginning of my mindfulness journey. And I am so thankful. And I'm thankful that I woke up yesterday with that feeling. I'm not sure if it's because I had migraines for 2.5 weeks straight over the last 3 weeks, and I am feeling lighter. Shout out again to Don Weinsrich at Renewal Wellness here in Calgary. We moved a lot of lymph. We calmed things down with the needles. And although my brain still feels very fuzzy, and this is attempt number 7 to record this podcast, I'm feeling much lighter and so thankful. And so this experience with Doug Maclean with Practical Wellbeing, I remember being in a room downtown near the Midtown Co-op, and there were a few of us sitting in a circle. There was a duotang, there was information. I'm sure I still have it somewhere. He was really wonderful, a really calming presence, and really just talked about thoughts that we have, anxiety, and it was a crash course in MBSR. So back in the late 70s, Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn, he developed something called Mindfulness Based Stress Reduction, and it still exists as an 8-week program. If you Google it, you can take it online, you can take it in the real. And so I really learned a lot about Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn that day, have listened to and read some of his books. I will link them in the podcast notes, things like Mindfulness for Beginners, Full Catastrophe Living. He was working at the University of Massachusetts in the medical center, and I actually listened to a podcast yesterday between Jon Kabat-Zinn and Dan Harris about why this started. And I guess he asked doctors, how often do your patients heal? And the percentage was not very high. And then there was this conversation as well about people who experience persistent pain or chronic pain. And I happen to be one of those people. And it's not about healing the pain necessarily. There are many conditions that people will experience for the rest of their lives. But the mindfulness-based stress reduction and the crash course that I did really opened up this world of awareness to what are our thoughts, what are our feelings, and how can we begin to learn to sort of watch the thoughts go by, to learn that we are not our thoughts, we are not our feelings. We can experience an emotion, we can experience pain, but that quote that I love, which is, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. And thank goodness that I was able to get into that workshop that day with Doug Maclean. Thank goodness for Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn, as well as other people that I have followed. Thich Nhat Hanh was considered the father of mindfulness. He has over 100 titles, books. He wrote poems, different things. I've listened to so many talks of his to really start to unravel and separate myself from the thoughts that I was having, the anxious feelings I was experiencing, and understand that I am not them and they are not me. And that doesn't mean that I don't still experience anxious thoughts, but it's like this workshop that I went to and these books that I read, and again, I will link them all in the podcast notes, began a self-discovery journey for me and a self-awareness journey. Because even listening yesterday, and I wrote down the definition of mindfulness according to Jon Kabat-Zinn. And so this definition of mindfulness is an awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. I'm going to read that again. So definition of mindfulness is awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. And again, this is a practice. I don't think there's anyone on earth who, even if they practice mindfulness, even if they practice meditation multiple times a day, it doesn't mean that there will no longer ever be anxious thoughts, but it is such a beautiful tool, whether you go to a workshop and try other modalities. I ended up going to a place called Self-Realization Fellowship here in Calgary. I would go every Sunday morning to meditate. I did their Christmas retreats. It was half day or full day of silent meditation. Anxiety is going to happen. Pain is going to happen. But can we become aware of these feelings and these thoughts and learn to, like the definition says, be aware of them, pay attention to them, not judge them, not judge ourselves, and learn to allow them to be there, to not identify with them as us, and live a more peaceful life. And that might sound weird and that might not make sense. But again, for me, I will admit, when the accident happened back in 2010, I think my self-awareness was like at a negative 100. And in the last few years, after going to this workshop and after doing a bunch of different things, and including meditation and mindfulness in my everyday, my self-awareness has skyrocketed. My ability and the tools that I have learned to be able to be aware that pain is happening in my body, but to not get stuck on it, to not freak out, to not catastrophize, is in large part because of Doug Maclean, the works of Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn, Thich Nhat Hanh, Eckhart Tolle, and I'm so thankful. And I mention these experts, these people who studied, who shared, who are still doing it. Listening to Jon Kabat-Zinn on Dan Harris's podcast was so wonderful. He himself even said a few things that he said, I've never said it like that before. So I will also link that in the podcast notes. But this is a gift that you could give yourself. So if you are someone who is experiencing anxiety to the point where you feel like it's ruining your life, I couldn't breathe. And when I say that, I mean like there was a time where I was in Spain and I remember talking to a friend of mine, former husband, lovely human, and I was so overwhelmed with these anxious thoughts prior to this. It was, I think, 2011. I was like, what do people think about? Because all I was thinking about was the anxious thoughts that I was having, and I couldn't think about anything else. And it was just exasperating. It was taking over my life. I could cry right now thinking about it. I'm thinking back to those days where I was sleeping in the room in the bedroom of my parents' house. I came back from Australia. I was living there from 2011 in the spring until 2012 in the summer when I bought my condo. Pretty much every single morning, I woke up panicked. I woke up not knowing where I was. I woke up feeling like I couldn't breathe. Atrocious. And until it happened yesterday morning, in a very minor way, I forgot that even happened. And again, I'm glad that it happened yesterday so that I could share this breakthrough moment for me, reaching out for help, finding a workshop, learning a couple of little mindfulness practices. I remember I experienced a panic attack in a tent during the stampede on a Friday afternoon. And they do say there are different techniques that you can use if you're experiencing a panic attack in the moment. And the one that I had learned was focus on one thing you can see, focus on one thing you can hear, focus on one thing you can smell, focus on one thing you can taste, and focus on one thing you can touch. So even if you're just touching your leg. And it helped. But I just remember how awful it felt, how I would never want anyone to experience that. And so if accessing a mindfulness program or finding something online, I know there's so much now online, even on social media, little snippets and clippets of things about mindfulness or breath work. Now, I will say a disclaimer, and I apologize for anyone who is triggered because breath work can be triggering. So in these podcast episodes, I often will invite you to place your hand on your heart, breathe into your belly, take a long exhale. If you've done that and that has brought up panic in you, if you've done that and it doesn't feel good, first of all, I apologize. Second of all, please don't play along, because oftentimes breath work can be a trigger, because when someone has experienced trauma, their state of breath can change. You could be hyperventilating when something has happened that's traumatic, and doing any sort of breath work can reignite the feelings or can bring you back to that place. And so my apologies if I didn't put a disclaimer on the very first episode about that. And when I might be inviting you to take a deep breath, maybe instead we could all just observe our thoughts. If I close my eyes now, my mind is fairly clear because I'm focused on sharing with you. But this idea of mindfulness and just observing our thoughts, learning over time to let them be there, learning, like I said earlier, that you are not your thoughts, they are not you. That's what my mindfulness practice has brought to my life. I've practiced mindfulness in different settings, and I can share more about that in future episodes. And I just thought it would be useful to share that my way in to mindfulness, my way into meditation, was through a one-day workshop, 9:30 to 3:30, and I can quite confidently say that that is something that changed my life for the better. It doesn't mean that every time I meditate, I go to some far-off land and I'm floating and flying. That can happen sometimes. But this everyday commitment and practice to coming back to observing my thoughts, to being aware of my thoughts, to being aware of my feelings, has been so helpful and so useful, especially with the anxiety that I experienced and that I can still experience, with physical pain, with emotions, with things that trigger me. I can create a space between those feelings, those thoughts, and myself. And so thank you to Doug Maclean, Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn, Thich Hat Hanh, Eckhart Tolle, Tara Brach, Jonathan Faust, people who I have listened to, people who have been in these spaces for decades. I learned so much. And what I would want for you is more peace. And what these practices have brought me is more peace. I know sometimes people feel, or they'll say, oh, I can't meditate. I tried, I can't meditate. I really feel like an MBSR, Mindfulness Based Stress Reduction 8-week program, or a one-day workshop, or a half-day workshop could be a way in. Because what I will also say, as someone who meditates every day, I've learned different ways to meditate. I don't subscribe to you have to sit up straight and have your spine a certain way. Some days maybe I'll meditate like that. Other days I'm going to meditate lying down. But it's the practice of observing my thoughts and letting them be there and not clinging to them, not holding on tight to them. Makes all the difference in the world. So if that's something you're interested in, I will link all of these people in the podcast notes. Feel free to reach out to me and share your experiences. You can find me at dksuddy@yahoo.ca. I'm on Instagram at danielle.suddy, Facebook, Danielle Suddy. Please subscribe, like, follow if you're enjoying the podcast. I've learned that helps more people find the podcast. I think on Apple and other places, you could even do a review. Please do a review. That would be super fun, and I would love to read it. And my heart is always open to know how things are going for you. May we all experience more peace. May we deepen our awareness. May we continue to discover more and more of who we are, come back home to ourselves, live more peacefully, live more joyfully, and experience more freedom. More freedom for me, for you. Sending you so much love from my thankful for mindfulness, for meditation. Thankful for all of you here listening. Happy heart to yours.